Jessica, thank you for joining us. Welcome. Now, Breyer is one of the 3 liberal members of the Supreme Court. What does his retirement mean for the future of the bench?
So it means so much, even though I know for people watching, they say, well, today this is a bench that is 6-3 in favor of conservatives. And next term, when his replacement is on the bench, it will be a bench that is 6-3 conservative. But it matters because of a number of things. One, it's not going to be 7-2. And we know that today's dissents can be tomorrow's majority opinions. And so it's a much bigger swing. It's a much bigger pendulum to try and move from 3 members to inch back up to that 5-member majority, as opposed to 2 members. It's a much higher threshold. The other thing is, I know we tend to focus on the big cases where they're decided 6-3, but there are a lot of smaller cases where the court is much more evenly divided. In one person's perspective that might differ in some smaller way, they might have a unique legal perspective on some issue, could make a difference in those cases, maybe the cases that don't make the headlines, but still the cases that affect our daily lives. The other thing is, it really matters who's on the bench. With only 9, every person matters in terms of how these opinions are written. So sure, we might see more 6-3 opinions, but they might be written in a different way, because whoever replaces Justice Breyer might say, well, if you write your majority that way, here's what my dissent is going to look like. And so we could have either broader or narrower majority opinions depending on who's in the minority. So it still does matter, even though the balance of power in the court doesn't change.
And Jessica, I was just reading a little bit of your article that you just wrote about Justice Breyer stepping aside. And, you point out that aside from the fact that it's almost impossibly difficult for a Supreme Court justice to voluntarily leave this incredibly powerful seat, his decision to voluntarily move aside may not be as entirely selfless as it appears on the surface, because you say he may also be considering his legacy. Is that correct?
I think that's right. It's just inescapable that he wouldn't look at Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and look at her legacy and how, frankly, it's largely being whittled away, and say, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen to my legacy. The other thing is that I think, unfortunately, part of Justice Ginsburg's legacy is this idea that she simply stayed too long. And I think he was very cognizant of that. He's just had a book tour, and you heard him say a number of times, I'm not going to die on the bench. I'm not going to die in this office. I think that idea loomed large, that it was entirely possible that part of what we remembered him for would be, frankly, his decision to thwart President Biden's ability to pick his replacement. And I think that was very heavily on his mind.
And so, Jessica, now what kind of pressure are Democrats and President Biden under to nominate and confirm a replacement quickly? And not just any replacement, but one that sort of adheres to the promises that President Biden made when he was on the campaign trail.
Well, enormous pressure. So President Biden was very transparent. He was not that transparent about some things about the Supreme Court, but very transparent about the idea that he wanted to nominate a woman of color to be on the Supreme Court. And there are a lot of good applicants. I think he's going to go to Senate Democrats and say, look, this is not a piece of legislation. This is not Build Back Better, where we're going to have maybe a second bite at the apple. This is a Supreme Court vacancy. Let's look at the 3 justices that President Trump nominated, and we can see how important it is that we fill these seats and which is the name that you are going to get behind. And so I think there'll be enormous pressure on Democrats to stay together. And frankly, for some of the people who are on the short list, they've recently been confirmed to the federal bench, and they have received a few Republican votes. It might be difficult for those Republicans to say why they supported that person, for instance, for the Court of Appeals, but things changed and they wouldn't support that person for the Supreme Court.
Jessica, can you take us through some of those contenders? I mean, who could they be?
So we have one woman who's actually on the California Supreme Court. And I think that if you look at her credentials, she's also clerked on the Supreme Court for the U.S. Supreme Court. She's worked in the federal government, and she now has deep experience when it comes to state law, which is not something we typically see for Supreme Court justices. She's seen maybe as There she is there, Judge Kruger. She's seen maybe as a slightly more moderate or incrementalist than some of the other names. I think the big name on that list is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. She's on the DC Court of Appeals. She's really made a name for herself in deciding some of the big disputes dealing with former President Trump and, for instance, his assertions of executive privilege during his administration. I remember one morning walking into class saying, all right, everybody, we're not going to talk about what we said we're going to talk about. There's a big opinion that just came out dealing with executive authority. It was her opinion. She has this really famous line, presidents are not kings. She's gained a lot of notoriety in the Beltway. She might be a sentimental favorite because she did, in fact, clerk for Justice Breyer. So I think those are two of the top names.
Great stuff. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your insight into the Supreme Court.
Thank you.